By the end of his life, Harry Gwala could barely move his own arms. The disease had twisted his body, locked his muscles, pinned him to a wheelchair. Yet the apartheid police still flinched at the sound of his name. Imagine that. A man who could not lift a fist, but whose words could still make a regime tighten its grip on the gun. How does a boy born on a remote farm in 1920 become the kind of man whose voice is feared more than bullets? And why does he feel like he is running out of time even before his real battle begins? He is born on 30th July 1920 in rural Natal, on land that does not belong to his family, in a country that does not recognize his humanity. The boy is given a name, Harry. The farm is ruled by a white owner whose word is law. His father must stand with his cap in his hands. His mother lowers her eyes when the bars passes. From the very beginning, Harry breathes in the thin, bitter air of inequality. He sees his parents wake before dawn, walk through frost without shoes, work until their bodies ache, and still be treated as temporary shadows on someone else's ground. School, for most children around him, is a rumor more than a reality. But Harry's parents are stubborn in their quiet way. They save every possible coin for mission school fees. They walk miles so that their son might learn to read a language that is used to rule them. On his first day at the little mission school, the boy holds a slate in his hands and feels something close to electricity. Letters, numbers, stories. He realizes that there is a second world hidden behind the one he can touch. And this second world is written in ink and taught in classrooms. If he can master it, maybe he can change the first one. He quickly becomes that child, teaches both love and fear, always asking why. Why are African children taught to be good workers, while white children are prepared to govern? Why do the maps on the classroom wall show Europe so large, Africa so small? Why does the Bible talk about justice and mercy, when the inspector who quotes it can have his father fired with a single frown? The answers he gets are soft, evasive, and often sharp. That's the way things are, Harry. You mustn't question authority. You are lucky to be in school at all. Each answer feels to him like an insult, like a dare. Around him, another boy is watching and learning too. Not a named rival in the traditional sense, but a mirror image competitor. This other boy, the kind the system loves, is learning something very different. How to fit in, how to bow just low enough, how to use good English and polite smiles to climb the narrow ladder allowed to black men. Harry can feel that silent race beginning between them. Two paths, two futures. For the rest of his life, he will be chasing and chased by that alternative version of himself, the compliant, cautious leader the regime wants. This already is his first competitor. When Harry is old enough, he goes on to training college, becoming what few in his community can dream of becoming, a teacher. For a while, it feels like victory. He stands in front of a classroom in a pressed shirt, chalk dust on his fingers, a row of young faces turned up to him in hope. But the victory is poisoned. The syllabus is designed to shrink minds, not expand them. History lessons erase African victories and linger on European civilizing missions. Civic education insists that the government is just, the pass laws are necessary, the land dispossession is complicated. Harry feels the chalk between his fingers like a weapon that has been blunted on purpose. He begins to smuggle other lessons into his classroom. After the official history lesson, he tells stories about African kingdoms, about Shaka, about resistance. After the geography lesson, he explains how land was taken, how reserves were created to pack people like cattle. He tells his students that their lives are worth more than the system wants them to believe. It is a quiet rebellion, but in apartheid South Africa, even a quiet rebellion echoes. Soon, whispers about the dangerous teacher reach the ears of those who keep order. Outside the classroom, The world is changing. It is the 1940s, and the news reaches even the rural corners of Natal. There is a war in Europe, a war against fascism, against the idea that some races are destined to rule others. Harry reads about Hitler, about concentration camps, about resistance movements. He cannot help but notice the hypocrisy. White South Africans go to fight fascism abroad while building their own system of racial tyranny at home. That contradiction burns into him. He starts attending meetings, listening to older men speak about workers' rights, socialism, and the South African Communist Party. The first time he hears someone explain capitalism and colonialism as systems, not accidents, not unfortunate realities, the world tilts. Suddenly, his father's bent back, his mother's raw hands, his students' hunger, the pass laws, the police batons, the white-owned farms, all of it fits together like a cruel mechanism. It is not chaos. It is designed, and if it is designed, it can be dismantled. He joins political study circles. Late at night, by paraffin lamp, he reads pamphlets smuggled hand to hand. Names like Marx and Lenin, far from his reality, become tools he can use to analyze the farm, the classroom, the city. Harry joins the Communist Party. He later joins the African National Congress as well. The decision is not polite, intellectual curiosity. It is a declaration of war, though he only dimly realizes it at first. The more he reads and teaches political education, the more the line between Harry the teacher and Harry the organizer dissolves. He begins visiting workers, speaking to them after long shifts, helping them understand why their wages are low, why their families live in townships under constant threat of eviction. He does not give them charity, he gives them vocabulary, exploitation, solidarity, struggle. There is a moment that stays with him forever. A group of exhausted laborers, still in overalls, sit in a cramped room as he talks about unity. At first, they stare blankly. Then one man's eyes suddenly sharpen. So you're saying, it's not just my boss who is cruel, the whole system is built on this. Harry nods. Another man leans forward and whispers, then we have to fight the system. The room hums with a new and dangerous energy. Harry walks home that night with his heart pounding. He knows something vital has shifted. He also knows the clock has started ticking. Once you awaken people, you become a target. His quiet rival, that imagined compliant version of himself, moves in the opposite direction. There are black councillors, carefully selected by the regime, who shake hands with government officials and speak of gradual improvement. They draft memoranda, not protests. They pose for photographs, not police mugshots. Harry sees them at functions sometimes, their suits sharp, their smiles measured. In their eyes, he sees a different calculation. Survival within the system, not its overthrow. They become, in his mind, more than simply wrong. They are competitors for the soul of his people, and he is determined not to lose. The regime's response is slow at first, then brutal. Harry's name appears on lists. Police begin to attend his meetings, standing at the back with notebooks, writing down every word. One afternoon, officials from the education department arrive at his school. They do not shout. They do not drag him away in front of his students. They slide a piece of paper across the desk. He has been dismissed. Unsuitable for teaching, the letter says. Engaging in subversive activities. Just like that, the classroom is taken from him. The chalk is removed from his grasp. For many, losing a job in that time is a life sentence of a different kind. A lifetime of scraping, of humiliation, of dependence. The competitor inside him, that imaginary cautious self, whispers, you see, you should have kept your head down. You have a family. You have responsibilities. But Harry hears another voice, quieter, colder. They have just freed you to fight full-time. If the regime wanted him to disappear into poverty, their plan fails. Instead, he throws himself into trade union work. He becomes a full-time organizer, moving constantly between factories, farms, workshops, talking, persuading, planning. At night, he feels the pressure of time more than ever. The security branch is growing more efficient. New laws are being passed that allow detention without trial, banning orders, the criminalization of almost any form of protest. He knows that in a matter of years, if they do not build strong structures, every leader, every organizer could be swept up in a single night. The clock is ticking for the movement, not just for him. It is a race. Can they awaken enough people, train enough organizers, build enough networks before the iron door of full-scale repression slams shut? The 1950s are a storm. Harry emerges as a hard, uncompromising presence in the Natal Midlands. He helps organize boycotts and strikes, supports the Defiance campaign, teaches younger activists how to stand firm in the face of police intimidation. He is not the tallest man in the room, but when he speaks, people lean forward. His style is not polished, not careful. He speaks like someone who has already lost everything the system can take: his job, his safety, any chance at a quiet life, and has decided to gamble the rest. That relentless energy earns him both admiration and fear, even among comrades. There are arguments, sometimes bitter ones, inside the movement itself. Some leaders urge caution, careful negotiation, petitions, gradual pressure. Harry is often on the other side of the room, insisting that the regime only understands force, that they must prepare for harsher methods of struggle. In these debates, his competitor is no longer imaginary. It is the real, living current of moderation inside his own organization. It is a battle of strategies, of timelines. Are they building for a long, slow erosion of apartheid, or for a decisive confrontation within their lifetimes? Harry votes for the latter, again and again. Then comes 1960. Sharpeville. Police open fire on a peaceful anti-pass protest, killing 69 unarmed people, many of them shot in the back as they flee. The photographs of bodies on the ground, of blood on dusty streets, travel the world. For Harry, the news hits like a physical blow. Whatever hesitation was left in him dissolves. He understands that the regime has moved to a new level of violence. Soon after, the ANC and other liberation movements are banned. Leaders are arrested or forced into hiding. The legal space for protest closes overnight. The time of petitions and polite letters is over. In secret meetings, in back rooms and safe houses, a new idea becomes unavoidable: armed struggle. Umkhonto we Sizwe, the armed wing of the ANC, is born. Harry, with his reputation for hardline determination and his deep roots in the Midlands, becomes vital in building underground structures. He now lives with the constant knowledge that any knock at the door after dark could be the police. He moves often, speaks in code, memorizes addresses instead of writing them down. The clock ticks louder. Each day of freedom feels borrowed. He knows, too, that his own body is not immortal. Long before any doctor uses the words motor neuron disease, he feels a strange fatigue in his limbs, a stiffness in his hands after long journeys, an ache that does not quite fit his age. He ignores it. He cannot afford to stop. He tells himself he will rest when the movement is stronger, when others are ready to replace him. But this promise, this private bargain with time, is one he will never fully keep. His future illness will add another merciless deadline to his life. One more clock counting down alongside the regime's repression. The security branch watches, waits, closes in. Informers whisper his name. Some comrades are arrested and vanish into solitary confinement. There are rumors of torture, of men hanging from windows, of women beaten for hours, of screams echoing through police stations at night. Harry sees how fear spreads, how it freezes people in place. He tries to fight it with political education, with stories of resistance, with his own example, but he can feel the net tightening around him. Every time he slips through a police roadblock, every time a raid misses him by a street or an hour, he feels the same thing: borrowed time. By the early 1960s, the question is no longer if he will be arrested, but when the competitor, this time not an idea or a moderate colleague but the apartheid state itself, is close to overtaking him. Files with his name and photographs stack up on desks in Pretoria. Interrogators compare notes, trace phone calls, follow relatives. It becomes a race between the movement's ability to entrench its underground structures and the state's capacity to decapitate them. Harry pushes harder, sleeps less, trusts fewer people. He has seen too much to believe in safety anymore. In 1964, the inevitable happens. He is arrested under the Sabotage Act, tied to the growing campaign to destroy the infrastructure of apartheid. The trial is long and draining, a theater of power in which the outcome feels pre-written. Prosecutors paint him as a dangerous agitator, a man who has poisoned the minds of workers and youth, who has chosen violence over peaceful progress. Harry listens, expression hard, back straight. The judge, robed and distant, represents everything he has fought against since that first mission school classroom, a system that pretends neutrality while defending oppression. When the sentence is finally read out, life imprisonment, time itself seems to crack. For a moment, the courtroom fades, and Harry sees flashes of the path that led him here. The farm, the chalkboard, the secret meetings, the strikes, the debates, the knocks on doors before dawn, a life now being sealed away by a single word: life. But the word does not land the way the regime intends. What they mean is, the rest of your days wasted. What he hears is, the rest of your days to continue the struggle on the inside. The state believes it has beaten him, outrun him, stopped the clock. They are wrong. The prison gates close on Harry Gwala with a sound that feels like the end of the world. But here is the twist the regime does not see. When the iron door slams, his battlefield does not shrink. It explodes. Overnight, his audience changes from hundreds of workers in factories to hundreds of hardened political prisoners in one of the most notorious prisons on earth. They think they have buried a threat. Instead, they have locked themselves in with it. Robben Island is not just a place of confinement. It is a machine designed to grind men down into something obedient and harmless. The ferry ride is short, but each wave feels like a layer of his old life being stripped away. The meetings, the strikes, the secret handshakes, the streets of the Natal midlands. When he steps off the boat, the wind hits him like a slap. Cold, salty, indifferent. Guards bark orders, dogs strain on leashes. White warders in stiff uniforms walk with the bored cruelty of men who know that no one is watching. They shave his hair. They take his clothes. They give him a number. The logic is simple. Erase the man, keep only the body. But Harry has spent his entire life preparing for this moment without knowing it. From the mission school to the factory gates, he has learned one thing. As long as you can think, as long as you can speak, they have not finished you. And here is the regime's first mistake. Robben Island is full of thinkers and speakers. In the communal cells, he meets men he has admired only through whispers and pamphlets. Seasoned communists, ANC veterans, trade unionists from distant provinces. The prison shoves them into a single concrete space and expects them to rot. Instead, they begin to plan. At night, when the warder's footsteps fade down the corridor, the cell becomes a lecture hall, a parliament, a war room. Prisoners sit on concrete floors, backs against walls, as informal classes begin. History, economics, strategy. Harry slots into that secret curriculum as if he has been waiting for it all his life. The chalkboard he lost in the classroom is replaced by the scuffed floor of a cell and the memory of men hungry for answers. He speaks about the Midlands, about workers' committees, about the delicate work of building underground structures. He draws maps of factories and townships in the air with his hands, teaches how to read the behavior of a boss, the mood of a crowd, and the movements of the police. His voice, roughened by cold air and stone dust, becomes a tool sharper than anything he used outside. But prison is not a school of perfect unity. The competitor he has been wrestling with since his youth, the voice of caution, of gradualism, of responsible leadership, sits across from him now in human form. There are prisoners who believe that the path forward lies in negotiation, in demonstrating respectability, in convincing the regime and the outside world that they are reasonable men who can be dealt with. They argue that the armed struggle is a dangerous gamble, that it will provoke even more ruthless repression. The debates are fierce and often personal. In the dim light of the cell, voices rise. One older comrade insists, "We must prepare to talk. We must show them that we are not unreasonable. Violence will isolate us." Harry's eyes flash. "Isolate us from whom?" he demands. "From the workers who are beaten? From the families thrown off their land?" The regime understands two things: profit and force. You cannot negotiate a wolf into becoming a vegetarian. His words are not elegant, but they are cutting. Men shift, murmur, nod, or frown. The prison becomes the latest arena for his lifelong race against compromise. Outside, the system tries new ways to break them. The work in the quarry is backbreaking, mind-numbing. Day after day, prisoners swing picks and hammers into rock that seems to have no purpose except to exhaust them. The glare from the white stone burns their eyes. Fingers crack and bleed. Guards use every petty humiliation they can think of. Shorter meals, deliberate delays in medical treatment, arbitrary punishments for imagined offenses. A man can lose himself in that routine, can forget why he is there. Harry refuses to let that happen. He turns even punishment into a lesson. When he is ordered to carry heavier loads, when he is forced to stand in the cold for some invented mistake, he notices who breaks, who endures, who watches silently. He files it all away, building a mental map of character. Years later, he will call on men he first studied under the glare of Robben Island's sun. Then, a new enemy enters the story, one no guard has to unlock a door for. It starts as a weakness, an odd tremor in his hands after long days of work. At first, he blames exhaustion, poor food, the cold that seeps into bone. But the tremor returns on days when the work is lighter. It spreads, so slight at first that only he can see it. His fingers do not always obey him. The muscles in his arms feel like they belong to someone else. Inside a prison, illness is a double sentence. Warders mock complaints as weakness. Doctors, if they come at all, are suspicious, quick to accuse prisoners of faking. For months, maybe years, Harry pushes through the growing stiffness, hiding it when he can. There is too much to do. Young prisoners arrive, eager and angry. They need political education, stories of struggle, a reason to believe that the years ahead of them in these cells are not a void. He refuses to let his body's betrayal slow the work. Every extra class he organizes, every strategy discussion he leads, feels like a small victory over the silent invader in his nerves. Time, though, is not on his side. His disease has no interest in politics or courage. It takes steadily. Some mornings he wakes and feels as if metal bands have been tightened around his arms. Sleep does not restore him. It simply pauses the struggle between his will and his muscles. In a place designed to crush his spirit, his own body joins the attack. The irony is brutal, almost theatrical. The man who has dedicated his life to hard, relentless work is slowly being robbed of the ability to move. The regime notices, not because they care about his pain, but because they see an opportunity. A man who cannot walk unaided is, in their eyes, less dangerous. A man who might soon not be able to hold a pick or raise a fist is no longer a symbol of militant defiance, but a broken relic. Bureaucrats in distant offices review medical reports. Some talk of humanitarian considerations, others speak more bluntly. It is expensive to keep a permanently ill prisoner for life. And then, after 8 years of what was supposed to be an endless sentence, the unthinkable happens. They decide to let him go. The day of his release is not triumphant. There are no crowds at the prison gate, no banners, no songs. The regime makes sure of that. They release him like a dangerous package being pushed out of a warehouse. Quietly, carefully, with instructions attached. He is served with banning orders that cut his world down to the size of a cramped box. He may not attend gatherings, he may not speak. Publicly, he may not belong to banned organizations. He may not leave certain places without permission. On paper, he is a free man. In reality, his life has become just another, larger prison. He returns to the Natal midlands that he left as an organizer and re-enters it as a ghost. Police cars idle outside his home at odd hours. Plainclothes officers follow him through town, pretending not to. Neighbors learn quickly to greet him with care. Too much friendliness can attract attention. The competitor he has always fought, caution, moderation, the lure of survival, stands very close now, whispering, "You have done your part. Your body is failing. Let the younger ones take the risk." For a moment, the argument almost makes sense. His limbs are weaker. He drags one foot slightly when he walks. Writing long letters is painful. Even holding a pen can feel like lifting a weight. He has already paid in years of his life. No one would blame him if he chose the smallest possible target and stayed within it. That is exactly what the regime is counting on. He refuses. If they say he cannot attend meetings, he will make his home a school. If they say he cannot speak to crowds, he will speak to individuals and small groups again and again, until the walls of his house seem to vibrate with whispered plans. Former comrades slip in and out, sometimes at dawn, sometimes late at night, under the eyes of informers and police. Over cups of tea and the clink of spoons, he sketches out strategies for rebuilding underground structures now that many of the older leaders are exiled or dead. This is where his next great rival steps into focus. Not a single person, but a whole generation of activists shaped by the township uprisings of the 1970s. They are young, fiery, impatient. They crave action more than theory, confrontation more than careful organization. To them, a man in his 50s, with a body beginning to betray him, might look like a relic of a slower time. Harry senses this skepticism like a physical thing when they first sit across from him, their eyes bright, their shoulders tense. He meets it head-on. He does not try to charm them with nostalgia. Instead, he speaks of risk in brutal, practical terms. Surveillance, infiltration, torture techniques, the ways fear will break a cell if they do not prepare for it in advance. He treats them not as children to be managed, but as comrades who must understand exactly what they are choosing. Slowly, grudgingly, many of them begin to see him not as an old man trying to stay relevant, but as a strategist who has survived the worst the state could do and come back still willing to fight. The state, predictably, strikes again. In 1975, he is arrested once more, accused of recruiting people for the banned ANC and its armed wing. The message is clear. They will not allow him to rebuild what they tried to destroy on Robben Island. The second imprisonment is in some ways worse than the first. He goes in already damaged, the disease eating away at his strength. Cells are colder when you cannot stop yourself from shaking. Time is longer when your muscles stiffen in the night and you cannot shift them easily. Yet even here, the pattern repeats. Where the regime sees isolation, he sees an opportunity to teach and to harden resolve. Younger prisoners share cells with him. Watch how he endures questioning, how he responds to provocations from warders. They notice that he does not allow self-pity to congeal in the corners of the room. When he speaks of pain, it is as data, not complaint, useful in understanding how far a person can be pushed before they break, and how to extend that limit with preparation and solidarity. When he is released again, after serving his new sentence, the country he re-enters is even more unstable. The 1980s are coming, and they carry with them something close to a civil war in slow motion. Townships erupt in protests, boycotts, street battles. The United Democratic Front rises, bringing together hundreds of organizations in open defiance of apartheid. In KwaZulu and Natal, political violence tears through communities as Inkatha and ANC-aligned structures clash, often with the hidden encouragement and arming of the apartheid state. This is the storm into which an aging, increasingly disabled Harry Gwala walks with deliberate steps. He is no longer just an organizer. He is becoming a symbol, the Lion of the Midlands. The nickname is not comfortable, but it sticks. He is known for speeches that demand action rather than patience, for a tone that is more battlefield than boardroom. Where some leaders talk of negotiation as an approaching horizon, he speaks as if war has already arrived in the backyards and bus stops of his people. His competitor, by now, has taken on a very specific form. The more cautious, negotiation-focused wing of the movement, both inside South Africa and in exile. They believe the time has come to think about talks, about politics in a future democratic South Africa, about how to reassure foreign governments and businesses that change will be orderly. Harry believes that talk of order, while the state's hit squads prowl the night and funerals fill every weekend, is dangerously premature. The arguments are no longer confined to cells or safe houses. They spill into public meetings, into internal ANC discussions, into the whispered and shouted conversations in township streets. Some accuse him of being too hard, too willing to embrace confrontation that will cost lives. Others, especially among the youth who see their classmates gunned down and their families harassed, hear in his voice the echo of their own rage and refusal. He does not flinch from the tension. To him, it is simple. The regime is still killing. Therefore, the struggle must still escalate. Yet he is painfully aware of the greatest twist of all. His time is running out. Doctors finally put a name to his condition, motor neuron disease, and that name comes with a terrifying forecast. Muscles will continue to weaken. Limbs will refuse to move. Eventually, he may not be able to stand, to walk, perhaps even to lift his own hands. For a man who has built his life on ceaseless movement, it is like being told that the walls of his body are slowly closing in. He does the only thing he knows how to do with such knowledge. He turns it into a deadline. Every meeting he attends in the Natal Midlands, he treats as if it might be his last in that hall, in that backyard, under that particular tree where people gather to listen. Every young activist he mentors, he does so with the urgency of someone transferring skills and courage before the door slams shut. He pushes himself past exhaustion, past pain, because to slow down feels like surrendering, not just to his illness, but to his oldest enemy, the idea that time will always be there tomorrow. The result is a paradox. As his body fails, his influence grows. Police reports begin to describe him not simply as a former Robben Island prisoner, but as the central figure in a militant network in the Midlands. His name appears in intelligence briefings as a man whose words can ignite protests, whose approval or disapproval can shift the balance inside local structures. In the dark offices of the security branch, officers slam their fists on desks and demand to know why this half-paralyzed man still commands such loyalty. They do not understand that his very vulnerability has become part of his power. When activists see him arrive at a meeting, shoulders hunched, steps uncertain, sometimes needing support, and yet still speaking, with a voice that cuts through fear, something hardens in them. If he, with his failing muscles and his history of prison, can still risk everything, what excuse do they have to retreat? By the late 1980s, as the apartheid state staggers under international sanctions, economic crisis, and internal revolt, Harry Gwala stands at the center of the Natal midlands like a storm anchor. Around him, rival factions jostle. Negotiations are whispered, then spoken aloud. Exiled leaders begin to talk about returning. The competitor he has battled for decades, the promise of a smoother, quieter road, of compromise, now stands closer than ever, dressed in the respectable language of transition and settlement. He feels the pull of that language. He knows that his people are tired, wounded, grieving. He knows that any opening, however small, might be the last chance to avoid even worse bloodshed. But he also knows that a transition built on forgetting the cost of the struggle, on smoothing over the raw edges of anger and sacrifice, will be fragile and unjust. So he does what he has always done. He prepares to walk into the next phase of the fight, even as his legs threaten to give way beneath him. The ferry to Robben Island is no longer taking men like him away. Now, planes are preparing to bring back exiled leaders. Talks are being considered in quiet hotels and distant capitals. The country is inching towards something entirely new, and no one, least of all Harry Gwala, knows whether it will demand more rage or more restraint. All he knows is that his own clock is ticking louder than ever, and the competitor he faces now is the most dangerous yet, not the cold certainty of the apartheid state, but the warm, seductive voice of peace that may come at the price of unfinished justice. The year the world finally starts to say the word peace with hope, Harry Gwala's own body is quietly declaring war on him. In the newspapers, smiling politicians talk about negotiations and a new South Africa. In the Natal Midlands, where Harry walks with a limp that grows heavier each week, the streets still run with blood. While the cameras focus on handshakes in distant conference rooms, he is counting bodies at funerals under corrugated iron roofs, feeling the clock in his spine tick louder with every coffin that passes. He understands the cruel symmetry. As the prospect of a political settlement moves closer, his time to shape it shrinks. The man who once had years in prison to think now measures his future in months, maybe a handful of years, before his muscles refuse to obey him entirely. And he is not only racing against his illness. His oldest rival has never been stronger. The competitor he has battled in arguments and pamphlets and prison debates, caution, compromise, the belief that freedom can be negotiated gently, is now walking around in a suit, carrying a briefcase, sitting across from him in movement meetings with the full weight of international opinion on his side. You can see that competitor one humid night in a packed community hall on the outskirts of Pietermaritzburg. The electricity has cut out again, so the only light comes from paraffin lamps and the orange coils of cigarettes. Outside, militia patrols and police caspiers prowl the roads. Inside, hundreds of activists sit shoulder to shoulder, waiting to hear what comes next. On one side of the makeshift stage, Harry sits stiffly, shoulders hunched, his right hand trembling just enough to make the enamel mug of tea rattle. Across from him stands a younger man, smooth, articulate, newly returned from exile, his voice trained in the meeting rooms of Europe and Lusaka. "We are entering a new phase," the man in the suit says. "The world is watching. We must show discipline, restraint. Negotiations are not weakness. They are strategy. We cannot keep escalating. The people are tired of funerals." Murmurs ripple through the hall. Eyes turn to Harry, he does not stand. Standing now is slow, painful, humiliating, and he refuses to give his rival that satisfaction. Instead, he leans forward, plants his elbows on his knees, and lets his voice do the rising. Tired of funerals? He growls. Of course they are tired. They are tired because the same men who order the shootings are now speaking the language of peace, while their guns are still hot. You want the people to sit quietly while the regime negotiates how much of our freedom we are allowed to have. Tell me, comrade, how many bodies do we need on the ground before they respect us at that table? The hall crackles. Some nod, some frown. The competitor smiles slightly, the kind of smile that says, "Old man, the world has moved on." This is the new battlefield, not the secret meeting, not the underground cell, but the open struggle over what kind of victory they are fighting for. Outside that hall, the reality is merciless. The 1980s in KwaZulu and the Natal Midlands are not just a chapter in a history book. They are a slow-motion civil war. At night, trains pull into stations with carriages streaked in blood. Whole families flee their homes with nothing but blankets over their shoulders as hostels become fortresses for one side or the other. You wake to the sound of gunfire and go to bed to the sound of mothers wailing. On Saturdays, funerals stretch from morning to dusk, each coffin draped in flags, each grave another argument against the idea that the fight is over. Harry moves through this landscape like a general whose headquarters is constantly under attack. Banning orders may have fallen away as the ANC and other organizations are unbanned, but new forms of surveillance and intimidation replace them almost immediately. Police files thicken with reports on the Lion of the Midlands. Informers whisper that he commands self-defense units, that his word can send hundreds into the streets at a moment's notice. To his enemies, he is the architect of chaos. To thousands of ordinary people, he is the only leader who speaks about their dead without smoothing the edges off the story. His days follow a punishing rhythm. Morning, consultations with local structures about boycotts, marches, stayaways. Afternoon, visits to families whose sons have disappeared, whose fathers have been hacked to death on dusty roads. Evening, meetings, always meetings, in halls, in churches, in cramped living rooms where the curtains never quite close, and every knock on the door makes shoulders tighten. He travels in battered cars that stutter over potholes, his legs cramped, muscles burning, hands sometimes needing to be lifted onto his lap by others when they refuse to move smoothly. And everywhere, his competitor is there, not always in person, but in argument. Younger activists, newly emboldened by the unbanning of the ANC in 1990 and the release of Nelson Mandela, ask hard questions. Comrade Harry, the leadership is talking with the government now. There are talks about talks. Should we not pull back some of the actions? They say mass action must be carefully controlled so as not to jeopardize negotiations. Harry listens, jaw clenched. He is no fool. He understands strategy as well as anyone. He knows that you cannot fight forever, but he also knows what pull back can become in the wrong hands. Surrender with good manners. Talks? He answers late one night as rain drums on the tin roof above a small group of organizers. Fine, let them talk. But understand this. The only reason they are talking is because the country is ungovernable, because people like you made it impossible for them to sleep at night. If we relax before anything is written, before prisoners are free, before the army leaves our townships, we are telling them, you can scare us into dropping our weapons if you just wave a promise of peace in front of us. I will not teach that lesson to the regime. His words are harsh, but they are also protective. He knows that the ones sitting across from him are the ones who will be arrested first if the talks collapse, the ones whose bodies will be found in ditches if the state's patience evaporates. His refusal to trust easily is not abstract ideology. It is shaped by every beating, every night in a cell, every comrade who never came back from questioning. The twist, the bitter irony, is that the movement itself begins to treat men like Harry as both indispensable and inconvenient. In private, senior leaders speak with awe about his ability to hold the Midlands together under siege. In public, they sometimes wince when his name becomes associated in the press with uncompromising militancy. International allies ask pointed questions. Isn't he too hardline? Too close to the violence on the ground? The competitor seizes the opening. In internal meetings, the man in the suit and others like him begin to frame the debate around a new set of virtues: flexibility, moderation, readiness to reach across the divide. He talks about foreign investment, about rejoining the international community, about the delicate art of coalition building. These are important topics, but for Harry, who has just come from a township where a mother washed her dead son's blood off the stoop with a bucket and a rag, they sound like a different language. Comrade Harry, one senior figure says, in a smoke-filled room where the air itself seems exhausted, we must think beyond the immediate pain. We are building a country now, not just fighting an enemy. Harry stares at him, eyes burning. And what kind of country do you build if the people who bled for it feel cheated? He asks. You want me to go to the mothers here and say, your children died so that one day you can watch the same police who killed them wear a new badge and call it democracy? No. If that is the plan, I will be the first to burn it. His words shock even some of his allies. The competitor leans back, steepling his fingers, letting the room absorb the impact. The conflict is no longer just about tactics. It is about memory, justice, and the shape of the future itself. All the while, the disease inside him sharpens the edges of every argument. Doctors have finally given it a name: motor neuron disease. They speak in careful tones about degeneration, about the slow shutting down of the body. You must conserve your energy, they say. Use a wheelchair more. Avoid stress. It is almost cruelly comic. Conserve energy, avoid stress. In the Natal Midlands of the early 1990s, where funerals outnumber weddings and hit squads patrol in unmarked cars, Harry listens, nods, and then mostly ignores them. Instead of seeing the diagnosis as a sentence, he turns it into a stopwatch. If his legs are failing, he will move them until they no longer move. If his hands tremble, he will use them to grab microphones, to slap desks, to point toward streets where protests must be organized. The competitor measures time in negotiation rounds and policy papers. Harry measures it in the number of cadres he can still train, before his voice too starts to fail him. Yet, there is another twist in this period that even he did not fully anticipate. For all his suspicion of negotiations, he finds himself drawn, reluctantly but irresistibly, into the work of shaping the new order. In the Midlands, violence between Inkatha supporters and ANC-aligned communities reaches such a pitch that whole districts risk emptying out. To secure a ceasefire, someone must sit down with local chiefs, hostile leaders, even with police officers whose uniforms still smell of tear gas. Send Harry, people say. They trust him, or at least they fear him enough to keep their word. So the same man who rails against compromise takes a seat at rickety tables in township halls and police stations, negotiating safe passages for school children, deadlines for removing roadblocks, agreements about not attacking funerals. He does not call it peace. He calls it buying breathing space for his people. But the effect is the same. He is now, in his own way, a negotiator. These are not photo-op moments. There are no cameras when he leans across a table at a local warlord and growls, "If you break this agreement, understand that the blood will be on your hands twice. Once when the people die, and again when they come for you. There is no applause, just nods, scribbled signatures, and the fragile silence of guns resting on knees instead of firing. His achievements in these years do not fit easily into slogans. He does not write constitutions or appear on international stages. Instead, he holds the center of a region trying desperately not to tear itself apart before freedom formally arrives. Under his watch, ANC structures in the Midlands grow in confidence and discipline. Trade unions, civic associations, and youth organizations learn to coordinate rather than compete. Young militants who might have drifted into undirected violence are pulled into more organized forms of struggle. Taught to think beyond the next stone, the next petrol bomb, many of those young men and women will, in time, become councillors, MPs, trade union leaders, community organizers in a democratic South Africa. When they look back, they will remember the man who shouted at them, argued with them, sometimes frightened them, but also trained them to resist not only the regime's brutality, but its seduction. The final pre-election years feel like a race run in a burning house. On one side, negotiations at Kempton Park advance, draft constitutions are drawn up, dates for elections are discussed. On the other, violence in KwaZulu-Natal reaches some of its worst levels. Massacres happen even as political parties register for the new contest. Every week carries a double headline. Talks make progress, and dozens killed in Natal. The competitor now has the wind of history at his back. The world praises moderate voices, rewards the language of reconciliation. Harry stands in the middle of this split-screen reality, breathing heavily, sometimes needing to grip the backs of chairs just to stay upright during long meetings. He knows, in a way neither his supporters nor his rivals fully grasp, that he may not see much of what is being built. That knowledge does not soften him. It steels him. If he cannot inhabit the future for long, he wants to make sure it is not built on polite lies. When candidate lists are drawn up for the first democratic elections, another battle erupts. There are those who argue gently but firmly that perhaps he should step back. Your health, they say. You have done enough. Let the younger ones carry this into Parliament. Behind the words, the competitor's shadow looms again, using concern as a weapon. But in the townships and small towns of the Midlands, people are adamant. We want Harry on that list, they tell organizers. We want the man who stood with us in the worst days to sit in that Parliament. Otherwise, what was the point? It is not just loyalty. It is a demand that the new order make room for those who paid the highest price. And so, when South Africans line up in April 1994, old women in church hats, young men in T-shirts, farm workers, factory workers, domestic workers clutching their ID books like sacred texts, Harry Gwala is both a symbol and a candidate. He is driven slowly past queues that snake around schools and community centers, watching faces that have seen more funerals than they can count stand patiently, peacefully, to mark crosses on paper. For once, the guns are mostly silent. The weapon of the day is a pen. He casts his own vote with fingers that do not fully obey him, gripping the pen awkwardly, making sure the mark is clear. It is a small, private victory in a life of public battles. Outside, people dance, laugh, weep. Some sink to their knees in the dust, overwhelmed. The regime that jailed him, banned him, tried to wait him out, has finally been forced to surrender at the ballot box. Weeks later, in Cape Town, another scene unfolds that would have been unthinkable when he first stepped onto the ferry to Robben Island. Harry Gwala, the Lion of the Midlands, sits in a wheelchair in the grand, echoing chamber of a parliament once reserved for white men who wrote apartheid into law. Around him, former exiles, former prisoners, former underground operatives take their seats as members of parliament. Across the aisle sit some of the very politicians who once presided over his persecution. now rebranded as participants in a democratic system. He raises his right hand to take the oath. The hand trembles, fingers curling inward, but it rises all the same. The words are formal, almost bloodless, about upholding the Constitution and serving the Republic. But beneath them lies the weight of mass graves, burned townships, prison yards, whispered meetings in safe houses, and endless arguments about how far to go, when to stop, what to demand. In that moment, the competitor he has battled for decades stands very close. Peace is no longer a distant promise. It sits beside him on green leather benches, smiles for the cameras, speaks of healing and reconciliation. The war supposedly is over. Yet, as he lowers his shaking hand and feels the ache shoot up his arm, Harry Gwala knows that for him and for the country he has helped drag to this threshold, another, more complicated struggle is only just beginning. The applause in the new Parliament sounds like distant rain on a tin roof. It should feel like victory, like the sound of history changing direction. Instead, to Harry Gwala, it sounds like something ending, while something far more dangerous, far more slippery, is just beginning. For the first time in his life, the enemy is not wearing a uniform and carrying a rifle. The enemy walks down carpeted corridors in the same movement colors as him, smiles warmly, speaks the language of stability, investment, reconciliation. And while Harry's sworn rival, the man in the suit, glides through those corridors with an easy stride, Harry is rolled through them in a wheelchair, his body mutinying against him, even as people call him honorable member. The contrast is almost absurd. The chamber is high-ceilinged and ornate, polished wood and green leather, translators in glass boxes, microphones that pick up every tremor. Outside, tourists pose for photographs in front of statues. Inside, one of the fiercest militants the struggle has produced carefully arranges his hands on the armrests so that their shaking will not be visible on camera. He looks across the floor and sees his competitor chatting amicably with newly converted Democrats, men who, a few years earlier, signed off on states of emergency and covert funding for death squads. Now they all talk about a new dawn. Harry listens, jaw set. The disease has made his face thinner, sharpening his cheekbones, but it has not softened his eyes. When he speaks during debates, his voice cuts through the chamber like an old battle song in a modern recording studio. Other MPs, still getting used to their roles, talk about fiscal frameworks, about macroeconomic stability, about sending the right signal to the markets. Harry clears his throat and begins in a way that makes even the translators sit up straighter. "Comrade Speaker," he says, "I hear a lot about signals to the markets. I hear less about signals to the mothers who buried their children in the 1980s. What signal are we sending to them if we keep the same men in command of the police, the same businessmen in control of the land, the same bosses in the same factories, and then tell them, 'Be patient, your freedom is in the pipeline'?" The chamber shifts uncomfortably. Some applaud. Some roll their eyes. The man in the suit smiles, that careful diplomatic smile he has perfected in Geneva hotels and Commonwealth meetings. After sessions, in committee rooms heavy with the smell of strong tea and new carpet, the old rivalry takes a new form. No longer is it Harry versus middle-level functionaries defending apartheid. Now it is Harry versus the logic of the world economy, and the competitor has become its translator. "We must be pragmatic, Harry," the man in the suit murmurs in one such meeting, when discussion turns to the pace of land reform and the restructuring of state industries. "If we scare off investors, there will be no jobs, no funds for houses, for clinics. We cannot nationalize everything. We cannot tear up every contract. We have responsibilities now." Harry's eyes narrow. He has heard pragmatic before. It used to come from the mouths of prison warders, urging him to sign a paper renouncing the struggle. Pragmatic? He echoes. You call it pragmatic. The people in the hostels call it betrayal. When we told them to risk their lives, we did not say, fight now. And later, we will ask the old bosses very nicely to share. We said freedom, not an installment plan. The room goes quiet. Someone coughs. Someone scribbles a note to change the subject. The competitor raises his hands, as if calming the air. No one is betraying anyone, he says, smile never slipping. We are trying to build a state that survives. Revolution without food on the table will not last. We cannot govern by funeral anymore, Harry. We must govern by budget. For a moment, Harry almost laughs. Govern by budget. It is such a tidy phrase for something so lethal. Numbers on paper can kill as surely as bullets if they cement inequality in place. But he is not naive. He understands debt, sanctions, global pressures. He simply refuses to let those pressures become an alibi. Time, however, is the one pressure he cannot negotiate with. The specialists have stopped pretending. In clinical rooms, smelling of antiseptic and old secrets, they explain the progression of motor neuron disease with diagrams Harry barely glances at. His muscles are thinning, they say. The signals from his brain are getting lost on the way to his limbs. The wheelchair is no longer a temporary support. It will become a permanent stage. His chest muscles may weaken. Breathing could become difficult. We do not like to speak in exact timelines, one doctor says gently, but you must prepare yourself. A few years, perhaps, maybe less. Harry listens the way he listened to police officers reading out his sentence decades earlier, with a blank face, while his mind races a few years. On paper, it sounds like an extension. In the reality of a new democracy trying to set its course, it is nothing. The competitor has decades ahead to shape policy, to write memoirs, to be interviewed on television. Harry has a handful of seasons to hammer his warnings into the bones of the movement. He turns the prognosis into a clock. Every speech, every caucus meeting, every community visit becomes a race against something only he can hear ticking. Not just his own body, but the fading memory of the sacrifices that brought them here. In the townships back home, people still line the streets when he returns, some out of loyalty, some out of curiosity. They see him now in smart jackets instead of underground clothes, arriving in official cars. The children who once whispered that he was a legend now run alongside his wheelchair, laughing, trying to touch the metal rims as if they are holy. At night, back in the Midlands, the ghosts do not let him sleep calmly. The war is officially over, but the scars are fresh, and the guns have not completely fallen silent. Taxi drivers are shot in disputes that smell suspiciously like old hit squad tactics dressed up as business. In some valleys, former enemies now attend the same peace committees, but sit stiffly on opposite sides of plastic tables, hands twitching whenever old slogans are mentioned. It is in these rooms that the next twist in Harry's story unfolds. The man who spent his life insisting that peace without justice is a trap now finds himself, again and again, the one dragged in to stop new massacres from erupting. Chiefs call him when rumors spread that a rival faction plans to torch a village. Former self-defense unit members come to him, restless in a peacetime that offers them unemployment and memories instead of glory. Baba, they say, we feel useless. Give us something to do. He could tell them to join the new police, to wear the uniforms of the very institution that once hounded them. He does not. Instead, he calls meetings in school halls, under trees, in union offices that still smell of ink and sweat. He talks about building, not burning, about neighborhood committees that monitor the new councillors, about cooperatives that try to create work with what little capital they have. It is a slow, frustrating shift from organizing boycotts and stayaways to urging people to attend ward meetings and draft complaints to councils. One evening, under flickering fluorescent light, in a community center whose roof leaks in 3 different places, he addresses a mixed crowd, former comrades, former enemies, young people who only remember the struggle as a word shouted at rallies. The competitor's face smiles from a poster promoting a government outreach program. The slogan reads, "Together, we move forward." Harry wheels himself to the front. The microphone stand has to be lowered. Someone fumbles with it, embarrassed. He waves the help away impatiently, grips the microphone with both hands to steady the shaking. "They tell you the struggle is over," he begins, voice still strong. "They tell you we won. They show you this new parliament, this new flag, this new anthem. Good. These things matter. But look at your street. Has the sewer stopped overflowing? Is your son employed? Does the police van come when you call, or only when someone important complains?" He pauses. Faces in the crowd harden. Some look away. The regime out there, he jerks his chin as if pointing beyond the hills, was defeated, but another regime is waiting to take its place. The regime of forgetting. The regime of be grateful and be quiet. That is the enemy now, and it is more dangerous because it wears our colors. The room breathes out as one. Some are shocked, others nod slowly. Later, the competitor will hear about this meeting and shake his head, telling colleagues that Harry is stuck in the old mode, that he does not understand the responsibilities of governance. But even he cannot deny the truth in the old man's words. Inside the ANC, the tension tightens. Committees argue over the line between healthy debate and undermining the collective. Younger MPs, eager to impress the leadership, whisper that Harry is too outspoken, that his speeches give ammunition to opposition, parties and journalists who want to paint the new government as divided. Foreign dignitaries, visiting the Parliament gallery, ask polite questions about that firebrand in the wheelchair. In closed meetings, some suggest quietly that he be persuaded to retire on grounds of ill health. He has done enough, they say. He deserves rest. Underneath the concern lies something colder, the desire to no longer have his gravelly voice interrupting neat presentations about 5-year plans and integrated development frameworks. But the Midlands has not forgotten who walked its dusty streets during the bloodiest days. When rumors of his possible retirement reach home, there is an uproar. Delegations travel to party offices, demanding to know who thinks they can sideline their lion. Women who once hid activists in their back rooms now threaten to occupy ANC regional offices if Harry is pushed aside. Old comrades, some of whom have reinvented themselves as respectable businessmen, find their phones buzzing with messages from furious constituents. The leadership backs down, at least publicly. Harry remains in his seat. The competitor visits him in his parliamentary office one afternoon, the atmosphere thick with unspoken calculations. The office is functional, impersonal, mismatched chairs, a flickering fluorescent light, a map of the provinces pinned crookedly to the wall. "You are making things difficult," the man in the suit says, without preamble, closing the door behind him. His tone is friendly, but his eyes are tired. "We are trying to steer this ship through very narrow waters. Every time you stand up and speak about betrayal, about regimes in our colors, you rock the boat." Harry looks at him, then deliberately, painfully, shifts his gaze to the window, where Table Mountain stands in indifferent silence. "You think the boat is rocked because I speak," he replies slowly. "I think the boat is rocked because you are steering it around the rocks the people asked us to break. Those rocks are still there. Land, wealth, the same families who owned everything before still owning everything now. You do not want to crash into them, so you go around. Fine, but do not ask me to pretend that going around is the same as moving them." For the first time in years, The competitor looks genuinely unsure of his footing. He sits down heavily in the chair opposite, the expensive fabric of his suit folding in unfamiliar creases. "History will judge us, Harry," he says, almost pleading. "It will not only remember who shouted the loudest, it will remember who kept the country from sliding into chaos. We avoided civil war. We avoided economic collapse. That must count for something." Harry's laugh is quiet, almost gentle. "You are wrong about one thing," he says. "History is not some professor in a robe. History is that boy in Mbali who thinks democracy means getting a job because he saw it on a poster. When he is still unemployed 5 years from now, he will not care what the global bond markets thought. He will remember who told him to wait. That is the judge you should fear." The conversation ends without resolution. It could not be otherwise. They are not enemies in the old sense. Both bled for the same cause. But they are competitors for the soul of the victory. And time, relentless, keeps pulling Harry toward a finish line he cannot see but can feel in his bones. By early 1995, the disease has advanced with merciless efficiency. His hands sometimes curl into claws that have to be pried open. His voice, once capable of carrying across fields without a microphone, occasionally catches, betraying him with a tremor that is not anger. Climbing even the small ramp into a meeting hall becomes a complex choreography of helpers, ropes, and stubborn refusal to be lifted like luggage. Yet he continues to travel, against medical advice, against common sense, against the pleas of his family. He insists on going to the funeral of a young activist killed in a township brawl that everyone suspects is more political than it appears. The coffin is small, the grave shallow, the mother dry-eyed in that terrifying way grief sometimes takes when tears have run out. Harry's wheelchair is parked under a thorn tree. Dust gathers on the wheels as mourners pass by. He watches the coffin being lowered, the same movement he has seen too many times to count. For a moment, he closes his eyes. When he opens them, he sees, standing at the edge of the crowd, the competitor, flanked by bodyguards, face solemn. Their eyes meet across the grave. The scene is almost too neat. The firebrand in the wheelchair, the strategist in the suit, the future they have helped create lowering one of its own children into the ground. No speeches here, no microphones, just a shared recognition that whatever compromises were made, whatever victories were claimed, not everything has been healed. Weeks later, the news filters out slowly, as news does in places where rumor travels faster than official statements. Harry Gwala is in hospital. Complications, they say. Breathing problems. His body, which survived torture, prison, hunger, and years of underground work, is finally insisting on its own ceasefire. Comrades gather in corridors, their whispered conversations drifting toward the room where machines measure oxygen levels and heartbeats. He drifts in and out of clarity. Sometimes he is back on Robben Island, shouting across the yard to other prisoners. Sometimes he is in a township hall, arguing about strategy. Sometimes he is in the new Parliament, listening to the smooth drone of policy language that always made his skin itch. And sometimes, in rare, quiet moments, he is simply Harry, a boy from the Natal countryside who once thought his life would be about teaching mathematics, not organizing revolutions. On June 20th, 1995, the stopwatch he has carried inside him for years finally runs out. The machines record the fact in cold numbers. The nurses note the time on charts. Outside, in South Africa's young democracy, people go to work, attend classes, argue about football scores. The newspapers will carry the headline the next day. Some will run his photograph from the old days, broad-shouldered, intense, eyes like coals. Others will choose the wheelchair image, frail but uncompromising. At his funeral, the contradictions of his life and legacy sit side by side, as uneasily as rivals in a coalition government. The coffin is draped in the new flag, the one he saw raised over a country that finally let him vote. Veteran comrades speak of his courage, his discipline, his refusal to bend. Some gloss over the more uncomfortable parts of his story. Others lean into them, reminding the crowd that he did not just fight the regime, but also challenged his own organization when he felt it drifting away from its promises. The competitor is there too, standing at the podium at one point, voice measured, eyes scanning a crowd that includes people who boo him under their breath and people who owe their careers to the stability he helped secure. He calls Harry a hero. He talks about unity. He mentions the word reconciliation 3 times, perhaps out of habit, perhaps as a spell he hopes will calm ghosts. But when he steps away, an old comrade, her hair grey, her back stooped, leans over to a younger activist beside her and whispers, "Do not let them turn him into a statue." The younger one frowns. "What do you mean, Mama?" She answers, without looking away from the coffin. "A statue cannot argue with you," she says. "A statue cannot tell you that you are becoming too soft, that you have forgotten why we fought. They will name streets after him. They will name districts. That is fine, but remember the sound of his voice, not just the image on the wall. In the years to come, a district in KwaZulu-Natal will bear his name. Official speeches there will describe him as a stalwart, a hero, a symbol of perseverance. School children will memorize dates: 1920, 1950s activism, Robben Island, release, 1994, election, 1995 death. Somewhere in those timelines, the sharp edges of his arguments will be dulled, as history always tries to do with those who made too many people uncomfortable. Yet his real legacy refuses to stay neatly filed. It lives instead in quieter, more stubborn places. In the trade unionist who refuses a bribe because she remembers his contempt for sellouts. In the councillor who stands up in a party meeting and says, "We are forgetting the poor," even when the room shifts uneasily. In the young activist who, reading about him for the first time, feels something awake in his chest that is older than him and not yet finished. The competitor, growing older, moving through higher offices and international roles, will sometimes find his thoughts drifting back to that hospital corridor, that leaking community hall, that office where Harry talked about rocks that others preferred to steer around. In his quieter moments, he will admit, if only to himself, that his rival was not entirely wrong. Peace won by compromise must be defended every day from becoming peace won by forgetting. Harry Gwala did not live long in the democracy he helped create. He did not have time to write thick books justifying his choices, did not get to see whether the boy in Mbali found a job, whether the mothers of the Midlands ever felt that the price they paid was matched by what they received. His story ends in a hospital room, not on a battlefield or in a courtroom or in a parliamentary triumph. But the clock he set ticking inside the country has not stopped. It ticks whenever a community demands more than promises. It ticks whenever a young organizer, standing in front of a restless crowd, chooses honesty over easy slogans. It ticks whenever the movement he gave his life to stands at another crossroads between comfort and courage, between steering around the rocks and trying, once again, to break them. In that sense, the competitor he spent his life fighting, the voice of compromise dressed up as necessity, never truly wins. It simply gets challenged by new voices, new lions, who grew up in the shadow of a man whose body failed him, but whose refusal to surrender, even to his own side, became part of the country's DNA.